All right, everyone. So I've been playing Genshin since week 2, and I've consumed a lot of Genshin Impact content, tier lists, and on top of that, I really like the lore, the story, the setting. I think the game's great in many, many ways. But the problem with every tier list I've seen so far is that they don't tell you how to really compare characters, right? Like, obviously, stronger is better. But for example, let me pull up people like Zhongli and where is she? Hu Tao. And I think both Zhongli and Hu Tao are exceptional characters. They're extremely powerful, but they do completely different things, right? So if you want Zhongli, you're looking for someone who brings a lot of utility. He has a huge shield. He has resistance shred, and he has a meteor which freezes the enemies. So all that is extremely valuable and awesome, but his damage is not amazing. Whereas Hu Tao, aside from a minor crit buff, has almost no utility and needs to be cared for. She brings enormous damage, but very little utility. So when we put those two things together, these are very, very different characters. And if I were to rank them in S tier, or, say maybe Zhongli's more valuable, whatever I want to say, you wouldn't know who to pull. And that's not because that the assessment is wrong, but rather that they do completely different things. And on top of that, um, characters make different teams, they have different synergies. And I think the third thing to consider is that everyone's account is different. Unless you're a super mega whale, you're not going to have all these characters, and you're almost certainly not going to have them all invested at a point where they become useful. Some people are at lower adventure ranks. Some people don't care about Abyss. So it's very difficult to take those S, A, B, C tier rankings and let you know what to do. So another thing creators have often talked about is what kind of role do they fulfill? What do they do? Like, are they this? Are they that? And these are not all the categories, but I wanted to highlight them. Basically, you're going to have a handful of different categories. The first one that everyone's afraid is main DPS. And these are characters that have to be on the field to do damage. Second category here is something called a driver or a facilitator. And these are characters that take up field time but enable your sub DPS to do damage. Yeah, that's what I left off here. One sec. All right. So then there's this needs to be deleted now. Main DPS, sub DPS. Oh, I'm an idiot. Wait, no, I overrode driver. That's what I did. So sub DPSs are characters who do lots of damage, but they do them mainly off the field, right? And then you have several kinds of supports on top of that. You have flexible support, which is good in many, many, many different teams. And then you're going to have a niche support, which why do I keep deleting things? Niche supports are good in only a few situations. They might be really, really powerful in those situations, but you can't just put them in a team and expect them to function, right? Then there's a few characters who require constellations to reach a level of usability whatsoever. Something, or maybe like constellation, not just constellation, high investment. So these characters here will feel very, very weak when you pull them the first time. But there are builds in which they become extremely effective. And last but not least, we have characters who are just plain power crept and no longer offer the value they do. Some characters in the power crept tier list might be very, very good, especially at lower adventure ranks, because they require less investment to come online. But then later on, they just fall off like a rock. And so these are characters you shouldn't heavily invest in beyond their initial usefulness. So I'm going to start this from the top. And on top, at the end, we have a special section for Sayu, because she's very unique. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to move some things up into the S double plus tier. And these are characters who are not quite must pull, but extraordinarily strong. And you should probably consider pulling for them because they fit everywhere. We're going to first start with Travelers, Aether and Lumine. Great characters, great story arcs. Zach and Sarah do awesome jobs on the English VA. I like them. But whatever element they choose, their kit is a bit underpowered. And that makes sense. They're starter characters. Doesn't mean they're not useful. I've seen Geo Traveler Meteors hit really hard. Animal Traveler brings some crowd control. Electro Traveler is a really good battery. But they are just wildly outclassed by some of the more available options. So I think these characters are power crept for now, but if you want to invest in them for future options, like, remember, they're getting 7 elements and we have 3, so we don't know their whole kit. Secondly, we have Albedo, who doesn't need to move. I think Albedo is a very strong sub DPS. He does good damage. The elemental mastery buff on his ult is useful in almost every reaction team. He takes up almost no field time. And then in terms of investment, you just need a Constellation 0, throw on some defense artifacts. His best weapon, the Cinnabar Spindle, is an event weapon that was free. So for very, very little into him, you get a reasonably high output. And so I think Albedo's really, really good. And so I'm putting him here. Let's move on to Amber. Amber is kind of a meme because her kit is awkward. Her numbers are not great. So people think she's just bad. I'm not certain that's true. I think that Baron Bunny can be blown up. The taunt works. The problem is enemies knock it around. I think her burst has astonishing pyro application and tread shields. The thing about Amber is that at Constellation 6, she gives people an attack buff, and she's really incredible at using the Elegy of the End, which is Venti's best in slot bow. And she can really buff your team. She takes up very little field time. So if you happen to have a Constellation 6 Amber with Elegy for the End, I know she can be like a really good support for Hu Tao. But she goes down here because she's only useful in those situations. Now comes Mega Waifu Ayaka, who's extremely popular. She is currently the most popular DPS in the game. Ayaka does large amounts of cryo damage in AoE. She's very, very popular in freeze comps. There are variations for her, but basically you'll run her with an Animo character of some sort, Hydro Applicator, and cryo support, and she does great. So she's definitely a main DPS. I think she's an excellent unit. I haven't gotten her, and that's because I have Ganyu. And Ganyu and Ayaka serve similar functions. But Ayaka is basically confined to these freeze teams where she excels. Come here up to Barbara. Now, I really like Barbara. Like when I was AR20, AR30, she kept me alive and she was great. Barbara requires basically no investment. You give her a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, which you get just from wishing, and a 4-piece maiden set, which I think you even get from the Adventurer's Handbook. And she does her job awesome. She doesn't need gear. She doesn't need levels. Her Q can heal you to full. Her skill though is rather unimpressive, right? It does heal you, but it makes you wet, which is not that useful. And I think the big downside is she has an 80 cost burst and generates no energy for herself, right? So you need the teammates to get her burst up for you. And obviously her auto attacks have very, very low scaling. So if I was a new player and I got Barbara, yeah, I'd use her a ton. But she's eventually outclassed by other healers. So she's definitely power crept at this point. But at like AR25 or whatever, Barbara was great. Coming up here to Beto. Beto is essentially in the right place here. She's an excellent sub DPS. Her counters I always find awkward to use, but can land for a mountain of damage. And her ult also in the right situation will do a ton of damage too. I believe though you need Constellation too. And you'll see a trend here since electro reactions are weak, the units compensate it with good scaling, right? So Beto, you're going to need a lot of energy recharge and you're going to need crit and crit damage. And so you need to get 3 stats really well for her. So she requires quite an investment. And I believe the lightning jump, which is her main value, comes at C2. But if you get Beto there, she's useful in a lot of teams. She's useful in taser comps, overload comps. The shield is not trivial. She does a lot of damage. Coming up here to Bennett. Anyone who's been following the meta knows Bennett is amazing. He has an incredible attack buff, which the thing about attack buffs is they work on basically every character to some extent. Every character scales on attack. He heals an enormous amount with that ult. His skill generates a large amount of particles, so he can battery other units. And on top of that, Bennett only cares about 2 things. And those 2 things really are base attack of the weapon he's using and hit points and maybe some energy recharge there. So he comes online very, very early and does not fall off ever. So he's amazing. And then, okay. All right. So as I was saying at the time, Bennett is outstanding. Before I continue to Chongyun, what I want to just tell people is that in my mind, the units at the left are stronger than the units at the right in general. Okay, though, let's keep going. Chongyun is not a weak unit. He does pretty respectable damage with his ult, and applies cryo infusion to people in his circle with his blade and with constellations. He obviously gets quite a bit better, but he's not used in that many primo team comps right now. He was often used in a national team or maybe a budget freeze team, but there's a lot of better options. That's not to say he's not valid. There's certain challenges in the Abyss where he is the best option, and that's because he's great into both cryo and electro heralds. So I'm going to put him down here in niche. Moving onward, we have Diluc, and I think Diluc was the original King DPS on release day. That's because he was the best option at the time, until you have, like, for example, Insane Constellations and Gear on Ningguang. He does a good amount of damage with very little investment because you only care about crit and crit damage. The thing is that he ends up being simply outclassed by later units and premium units. That's not to say he's not good, and if you're a low-level player, you can just hyper-invest into Diluc and he will completely carry you. But in the later stages of the game, he's just straight-up power corrupt. I do think he's stronger than Barbara, so I'm going to put him here. Moving on, we have Diona, and Diona basically does everything but damage. She gives you a giant shield. She gives you a big heal. She generates energy particles. She also scales nicely on constellations. Her C1 gives her an energy refund, and that's really important if you get that. And C6 is 200 elemental mastery, which is, not negligible. So she's actually really strong and really incredible. She can fit in places a lot of other healers or shielders can fit into as well. So, like, Diona, for example, is one of the reasons Barbara is obsolete. Yes, she takes more investment to start feeling good, but she does just about everything. Moving on to Fischl. There was a thing early in the game where Fischl could main DPS with physical bow users, but really she's a sub DPS, and that's because Oz does a lot of damage. She generates energy particles. She doesn't really need a specialized artifact set or a specialized weapon. You have a lot of options there. And if you get her to Constellation 6, she does a load of damage and she batteries your team. So she's ends up being a very, very strong sub DPS. And personally, I like her better than Beidou, but these two units are pretty similar. They're just different. Beidou requires more to come online, I guess. But she does give you the shield and more AoE, where Fischl's damage is mostly single target. Moving on, we have Ganyu. And Ganyu, when she came out, was just astonishing damage. Her damage is really, really high. You can run her definitely as a main DPS is where I'd put her. I think Ganyu's overall damage might be a little less than Ayaka's, but Ganyu can melt as well as freeze. I know Melt Ganyu has some of the highest damage output possible at really extreme investment. She can also sub DPS and use her taunts and her burst to have an extreme cryo application. She's really incredible with grouping units like Venti because each hit of her ult is an AoE. And if you group the enemies and the ult hits all of them, it splashes all of them. So she annihilates any sort of AoE damage, and her single target is pretty solid too. So I think Ganyu is still excellent. Moving up, we have Hu Tao. And when I first summoned for her, I was like, well, I have Diluc, right? They both are main pyro DPS. But even with less investment, Hu Tao was doing more damage, right? And as I've invested in her, her damage is astronomical. I think Constellation 1 is incredible if you want to spend the primos on that. Staff of Homa, if you get that's an incredible weapon, but she does really well even with like a C0 and some refinements on a Dragon's Bane, like Dragon's Bane R3 or maybe Deathmatch. On top of, I guess her downsides is she kind of needs to be babysat. She is almost always paired with Xingqiu for his Hydro application. You can also pair her with Ganyu for Cryo application, for example. And a Shielder is required, so you normally pair her with Zhongli. So she needs a lot of babysitting. That said, you can use her with other Shielders. Diona, Toma, C4 Yanfei, etc. all work. I think her damage is completely bonkers. I'm putting her up here in the main DPS category. Ayaka is more popular, among people who clear Abyss. And I think she may be a little easier to execute in a freeze comp. But Hu Tao's damage is just completely insane. Moving on here with Jean. Jean has a healing ult. She does decent damage by herself. She can group enemies with her skill. She can toss them into the air, and they can fall down and do like a large amount of damage to fall damage. So she has some utility. I think she's pro in Theater Mechanicus. That said, I don't think she's as strong as some of the modern supports anymore, and it's just because they do more. Like Diona, again, for example, has heals and shields and an EM buff, whereas Jean will have healing and a viridescent buff from her artifact set. So I'm putting her down here in a flexible support. She can go in a lot of teams. I think her meta use is to support Xiao, where she's very, very effective. But, you could use her anytime you need a healer or a viridescent shred, and she would be good. Moving on to Kaya. Kaya has really excellent cryo application. His C2 is really powerful. His C6 looks amazing. I can't wait to get it someday. And his skill on such a short cooldown generates a lot of energy. And so Kaya has some great potential use. And my thought is that at C6, I would like to try and like with Kaya and Hu Tao together, or some other melt comp where he could apply cryo for her. That said, he does require at least C2 or C6 to be viable. And so he's going down here. You'll notice starter characters are in this category awesome. Like, they can be good, but it's just so hard to get their constellations, right? Because they're not on the character banners. Moving on to Keqing. Keqing is my personal favorite character. I think she's adorable. I love her personality, love her outfits. I love her playstyle. I think she's super, super fun. I think her ult is totally and completely badass, and totally love it. I really do. But the thing is, as we said, she's Electro, and Electro reactions aren't very good. In addition, you can overwrite her Electro Infusion, so she can't really pair with Bennett C6 or Chongyun. And the main problem is just, like, her numbers are too low, right? She was always weaker than Diluc in terms of damage, and he's just been power crept. So Keqing is way power crept out of the meta. I'm sad about it. I really wish she was strong, but she's just not. Moving on to Klee. Now, I think Klee, our tiny little artisaness, is super cute. I think the voices, the voice actor is amazing. The animation's amazing. Like, I really, really love this character. Wish I could summon for her. The thing is, she's squishy and she's short range. And in order to get enough uptime, you have to do dash cancels and jump cancels. So she's really hard to play well. And even when played well, she does about Diluc level of damage. In addition, her pyro application is so incredibly copious that you can't really vaporize with her. So even if you play Klee and you play her great, her ceiling is low. I know some people with high constellation Klees can use her support. C2 and C4 are really strong, but constellations unlimited 5 stars are really expensive, and if you're going to be spending that much on Genshin, you're probably going to have just better options. So as much as I like her, she's straight up power crept. Moving on to Lisa. Lisa has some physical resistance shred, which is valuable at later constellations. I think it's C2. And I think her ult has incredible electro application if you need that. But there's a couple problems. First of all, Electro reactions, as I've said, it's not that good. So you probably don't want electro application that much. And then on top of that, her skill is really, really awkward to use. Now, I think it'll be viable at C6. I think when you get the stacks and you can detonate them, maybe she does enough damage to be useful. But until then, no. Again, love the character, love the design. Rei Tanaka, who does her Japanese voices in a bunch of games, she's amazing. But I think she's only valid at C6 right now. Moving on to Mona. Mona is a damage amp, right? We had a discussion whether she should be a support or not. But Mona can basically take someone else's damage and make it into a nuke. You can get really, really high numbers with it. You kind of have to build the right team around her Omen. She also doesn't require incredible investment in terms of her gear. You could do a Thrilling Tales or a Wid Sith if you want her damage to hit it harder. And that would be great. I would say also that she's pretty flexible. I've seen her run in vape comps and freeze comps. She's paired with Ganyu and Diona in a Morgana team comp. You've seen her in lots of damage showcases. So she can make someone nuke really hard. My thought is I think she belongs in support, but her damage is not negligible. As you might not be, think about it like Albedo brings some support, and Beto honestly both bring some supportive capabilities, and every character brings damage. So sub DPS versus support is a spectrum, just so people are aware of that. Moving on to Ningguang. I use Ningguang a ton to help me find ore because I need a lot of ore, honestly. Ningguang's a character that scales incredibly well with constellations. Her C1 makes her attacks AoE, which means when you pair her with a grouper like Venti, she's amazing. Her C2 lets you reset her Jade screen, which allows her to use Kagura's Verity, one of the few characters that can. But her C6, where you get 7-star Jades, really, really ups her damage. Being Geo, she doesn't have access to reactions. So for her to do well, like, she needs to have a good weapon and good investment and good constellations. But then she can do, like, really quite excellent damage, and I'm a huge fan of her. I use her for open world all the time. She's good against the Geovishap. Noelle, awesome character. Love her. Her hangouts were astonishing. They were great. The thing is that she doesn't generate energy, and is her one major drawback, and she does no damage till C6. Now, I have a friend with a C6 Noelle, a good artifact set, and a Redhorn Stone Thresher, which is her best in slot weapon, and it's amazing, right? So a C6 Noelle with a good weapon and good artifacts is really, really amazing. But a C5 Noelle or C6 without those things is just like nothing to write home about. So again, I'm putting her in front of the starter characters because they're so hard to get constellation for. She definitely goes here. At a high constellation, she's astonishing. Chi-Chi is kind of like Barbara. First of all, she doesn't generate her own energy without her C1. Her cryo application is not that great. Her ult looks cool. She heals a ton, but she does no damage and brings no energy, right? So I think the build I want to try in her is using a sacrificial with tenacity, the Millilith, to keep an attack buff and the healing up. And yeah, she might be valid then, but ultimately Diona does everything Chi-Chi does, but better. Maybe not the same in sheer healing, but most of the times you don't need sheer healing. So she definitely goes into the power creep tier. I have seen her in Eula comps, though. That said, like, don't make me think I'm hating on these characters. I really like them. They're just not as good. Moving on to Razor. I think Razor is the definition of cheap DPS. His ult forces him to be on the field, so he's always on the field. His kit's really easy to use. His base damages are pretty high. He doesn't require special artifact sets, like Gladiator 4-piece is excellent for him, for example. He doesn't really require support outside of healing. His damage is fine. It's physical, so it doesn't respond to reactions. And he was the first DPS character I got. So I really like Razor. I think he's good. But essentially, once you get any 5-star DPS, he's simply going to be outclassed. Like, again, it's kind of that D-Luke boat where if you're a low eventer rank and you have Razor and you're like AR 25 or 30, he'll feel amazing and he's awesome and you should use him. But, like, people don't clear level 12 Abyss with Razor, right? There's just much, much, much better options. So he's going down in the power grub tier. Moving on. We have Sucrose. Sucrose does a lot of things well. She groups the enemies. You typically run sacrificial fragments on her, and her C1 gives her an extra charge, so you can use 3 elemental skills in a row, which generates tons of energy. She runs the Viridescent set, which is a great debuff. And she can swirl, and her elemental mastery buff, she gives everyone on the team some of her elemental mastery. So she buffs every reaction team. So Sucrose, I think, is an excellent unit. She's extremely flexible. She's good in literally any reaction team. And she becomes quite powerful. Like, I think that maybe nowadays with Kazuha and Venti, people aren't appreciating how good she is just because there are some really incredible options out there. But I think if it wasn't for those two, Sucrose would be extremely high up. So I'm actually going to put her here. Tartaglia, I love this character. I think he's awesome. His personality, his art, his music, everything about him, he's great. The problem is his damage is not amazing, especially single target. He requires a lot of investment to come online. And I think his best teams are with either Taser comps with Fischl and Beto here, or with like Xiangling and Bennett for reverse vaporize. And he essentially is one of the few in this special class I'm calling a driver. Drivers are characters that can really enable off-field damage. Not that they have no damage themselves, because he absolutely does. But he makes your sub DPS shine. The thing is, if you wanted a main DPS, like Hu Tao will just do more damage, period. So that's the downside. And I also don't like the fact his elemental skill is such a lockout. That said, I like him, but I have never summoned for him. I probably won't, but I see how he can be good. Moving on to Venti. Venti's the first 5-star I ever got. I think he's an incredible unit. He has energy recharge as an ascension stat and has access to a large number of bows. And so he always has his ult up, right? It's relatively cheap and it's up all the time. And Venti's burst will suck up all the enemies around it. And as long as the enemies are able to be sucked up, they're sitting in a clump and you can just AoE with your team. He also has a Viridescent set, which is incredible. He does pretty decent damage himself. You don't have to run Elemental Mastery on him the way you do Sucrose or Kazuha. You can also use him with Elegy the End, which is his signature weapon. And that is a great weapon. It buffs the whole team. So I think Venti's an incredible unit. I know he's fallen out of favor a little bit because Abyss 12 has enemies where you can't group them. But if there are enemies you can group, Venti just completely dumpsters them. Open world domains, Abyss 11 or below, he's amazing, right? So going flexible support. I'm putting him ahead of Diona. Um, Moving on to Shanling, at first I wasn't that impressive, but I think she's a unit that requires investment, right? Because you need to have crit, and you need to have crit damage. You need to have a lot of energy recharge because she requires a lot of energy, and then you like to have elemental mastery. So she needs a lot of stats to be good. And she also comes on at C4 is her big constellation where she becomes really strong. That said, when those conditions are met, she does an incredible amount of damage. She fits in a lot of teams. There's the national team with Bennett, Jingcho, Chongyun. There, she can support Ganyu in a melt comp, Tartagula in a vaporized comp. Basically, any unit where you're in close proximity. You could pair her with Kaya and like Rosaria for a melt comp. Like she could go in an overload comp with Fischl and Beto. Like she's incredibly flexible, and that's just because she brings so much pyro damage and so much pyro application to the table. She's really outstanding, and I think she's a great unit. Yes, she requires investment to scale, but oh my god, at the end. Moving on to Xiao. Xiao, Mega Husbando, for sure. Really nice character. I like him a lot. It's not my playstyle, and I know some Xiao regretters, and I know some Xiao lovers. He does kind of need to be babied, because he's going to need healing and shielding. I think his most common team is Zhongli, Albedo, and Jean, which are 3 more 5 stars and are not accessible to everyone. That's because he loses hit points and he's pretty squish. He also needs a really excellent weapon and a lot of artifacts to come online. The Primordial Jadewing Spear is great if you get one. So he needs to be babied, and then he does a lot of damage. The thing is, he doesn't have access to reactions like some of the other main DPS do, and he specializes in AoE damage. So I think he's a little lower than these other main DPSs, but like Xiao can still be an excellent unit. You just have to give a lot to him, and so I think if you like him, go ahead and pull. Xingqiu is incredible. Xingqiu, first of all, his base kit you get for 0 investment includes a little bit of healing, a little bit of defense, which are nice, but the main thing is he brings incredible hydro application. So, for example, if you pair him with Diluc or Hu Tao, you can get really awesome vaporized teams. You can pair him with Raiden and Beto or whomever to get taser teams. He goes well with Kokomi for that, for extra hydro application if you want hydro resonance. He could go with Ayaka for freeze teams. It's extremely flexible, extremely powerful, because his hydro application in comparison to every other hydro character is just through the roof, right? Whereas Mona or Kokomi also have all-field hydro application. Xingqiu does it at a much faster rate, so you can reliably vaporize. If you get I guess his downside is it requires a lot of energy recharge, but you'll get that eventually at later in the game. And if you give him some crit or crit damage, he's astounding. So I think you bring him mainly for his damage, and so I'm going to put him in the sub DPS category. But I think he's really, really amazing. Moving on to Xinyan. Xinyan basically brings you a shield, which pulses some damage. It's cool. Pyro application. She can do some decent physical damage, and her ult looks cool as hell. I guess her downside is she has split scaling. You might want her to be a physical DPS because she has a resistance shred. You might want her to be a shielder, and she ends up kind of like being bad at both. Right? Like, Toma or Zhongli are probably going to be better for shielding. Zhongli's the best at shielding by far, by the way. Or Diona will do shielding and a lot of other stuff. So she's utterly replaceable at shielding, and then I think even Razor would do more physical damage for her than her at equal investment. So it's really too bad. She's a fun character. I think Laura Stahl's an amazing voice actress. She also does Barbara. But like she's she was power crept the day she was released. Like she's never been a good unit, sadly. Coming on to Rosaria. Rosaria has good off-field cryo application and a crit buff. So she does that well. I think you need C2 for her to really come online. You want artifacts with a lot of crit, so she's a bit hungry for that. Her burst always seems to be up, so I don't think you need a lot of energy recharge. Probably a medium investment unit. She can be really good. I think she acts similar to Kaya, and there's a lot of teams that run them both. Like you could run Rosaria, Kaya, Official, Beto, and if they're well invested, they'll clear a best that does a lot of damage. She doesn't bring a lot of utility. I'm going to leave her right here in sub DPS. Personally, I like her more than I like Beto, but I know the community's high on Beto, so I'm going to leave her where she is right now. Moving on to Eula Lawrence. Best thighs in Genshin, of course. Eula is a unit that requires a lot to come on, but does incredible damage when she does. Her constellations are very, very good if you whale out. She scales great on crit and crit damage. You almost always run her in a superconduct team, so you run her often with like Raiden, maybe Kojosera, maybe Ye Miko. You could run her with Fischl, you could run her with Beto, and then finish it off with like Chi-Chi or Diona for healing, or even Shenhe. It's one of the few comps Shenhe can work in. But her damage can be phenomenal. I think that I didn't pull for her specifically. I think like Xiao, she requires a lot of investment to show her potential. But, if we're talking C6, Eula might be triple S tier at super, super high investment levels. Her damage is incredible. Moving on to Yanfei. I like Yanfei, of course. She's acts like a Pyro Catalyst DPS, which is cool, and you think she's in the same boat as Klee, but it's different because she has so much more range. Also, I understand at C6 is that Yanfei will out DPS both Klee and D-Luke. So at really high constellations, she becomes very good. You also probably want to run her with Bennett and Xingqiu, just like every other Pyro DPS. A niche build that you can do also, if you have Constellation 4, is Tank Fei, where she gets a shield, and she can sub in for Zhongli on Hu Tao teams, and that way give you Pyro Resonance. So Yanfei has some potential, but I think her potential is locked behind Constellations. And like I think a lot of other characters down here, you're going to need some really good artifacts to get her to do comparable damage. Moving on to Kaitahara Kazuha. Kazuha is an amazing unit. I didn't pull for him because I had Venti and Sucrose and they're both built, but not pulling for Kazuha is a major regret. I regret it tremendously. I'm dying for his rerun and I haven't gotten it yet. He's great at exploration because you can leap up. He's great at exploration. His skill generates good amount of energy. He can group enemies. He can do good damage. His ult is huge and swirls everything. The big thing is if he swirls an element, he gives you a buff to that elemental damage. And at high EM, that buff can be such as 50%. So it's like giving whomever your main DPS is an extra goblet. Which means Kazuha is good in basically any team that's not physical or Geo or, I guess, Xiao things. But if you're running anything else, he's astonishingly good. I would definitely put him in the flexible support tier way up at the front. He also only requires elemental mastery, and you can use a craftable weapon on him, so it's up here. Yoimiya is a fast-attacking single-target Pyro Bow user. So she has her own kind of niche. You can run her with Xingqiu. She's really good with Yunjun. She's good with Bennett, of course. Her downside is she has no AoE, and she has kind of a fixed rotation of how she comes in and out. When she came out, many people, including myself, were a bit underwhelmed with her damage. But I know if you run her like with C6 Fischl or Xingqiu or Yunjun, really enables Yoimiya a lot. She can do really good damage. I guess the downside is it's single target, but some situations all you care about is single target. So I think she's really strong. I think because she has access to reactions, I think she's stronger than Xiao. That doesn't mean that Xiao's invalid. And I just think the ones in front of her have both single target and AoE. So she's less flexible than the ones in front of her. Moving on, we have Sayu. Sayu is a very special character. Her combat power is actually really low. She doesn't do much damage, and she does a little healing, which is of course nice, but nothing special. That said, I think Sayu exploration is incredible. Her roly-poly skill is astonishing and saves you tons of time, tons of stamina. She can break ore. You can cheese it so she can run through domains. Like, having Sayu in your party allows you to do basically everything faster. And on top of that, in open world, you're not going to need like Bennett, Diona kinds of healing most of the time. You're not going to want to run Barbara because her healing isn't necessary, or Chi-Chi likewise. Sayu's healing is normally perfect. I Win to Lose came out with a great video about tips and tricks to save time, and Sayu was half of them. So I think she's a very special character. I wouldn't pull for her specifically because you'll get her eventually. But if you have a Sayu and your team is strong enough to do the combat as 3, you should definitely bring her along. Like, for example, my open world team is Zhongli, Ningguang, Venti, and Sayu. And they get around quickly and dumpster basically everything in the open world. I wouldn't use her in Abyss, though. Moving in for Raiden. Raiden's an incredible unit. She does lots of damage. She applies Electro off field. Her ult not only does it look amazing and hit really hard, it also gives 30 energy to your whole team, refilling them up. And that allows you to run, the Raiden national team, for example, which is with Bennett, Xingqiu, and Xiangling. And Xiangling and Xingqiu require a lot of energy, but she batteries them. It's incredible. Her utility is really high. Her damage is really high. She does require a decent emblem set because you want to build crit and crit damage on her as well as energy recharge. So it takes a little more for her to come online, as you've seen with other Electro units. She has access to the catch free to play, which is great on her. If you go on her weapon banner, the Engulfing Lightning is an incredible weapon. Really fits her well. It's pretty flexible too. You can give it to Xiangling if you don't have Raiden. So Raiden is awesome. At C2, she can shred defense and become hyper carry, and you can support her, but she also is a great driver. She can drive teams. You can run her in. I've been running Overload with Raiden, Fischl, Xiangling, Bennett. You can change Fischl to Sucrose or Venti to run it with grouping. You can run her with Kokumi and Xingqiu to have a taser comp, right? You can probably run, I guess, Xingqiu, Xiangling, Bennett is taser, vaporize, overload. You can probably run her with Ayaka for what is that, a superconduct team? Well, maybe that's not the best, but you can run her with Eula. Riding Eula teams are really strong. She has a lot of options, extremely powerful, extremely flexible, really an incredible unit. And she's a driver. Moving on to Kojo Sarah. Kojo Sarah, first of all, I like her character a lot, but I find having to aim shot and pick up the feather makes her essentially unusable below C2. And I have a C0 Kojo Sarah. Her real power is on C6, where she can make your electro damage do more damage. She gives them 60% crit damage, which is like an extra goblet, which is obviously astonishing. Plus, she's an attack transfer. The thing is, it only applies to electro units. So, like, Kojo Sarah is there to buff Raiden or Yae Miko. She requires constellations to be useful. Her attack transfer means she needs a really high base attack weapon, so you want to give her a really nice weapon. So she's both high investment and niche, so I'm putting her down here. Her compositions are very inflexible. In those compositions, she can do amazing, but is kind of pointless outside of it. That said, I hope there will be more options for her later. Moving on to Kokomi. Kokomi was kind of a meme when she was released. Kokomi is used at a really high rate in Spiral Abyss, which means people who own her love her. People really enjoy using Kokomi. She doesn't bring a lot of damage to yourself, but she brings healing. She's very tanky. She has resistance to interruption. She has off-field hydro application. Basically, she has everything except a shield and damage. That said, that means her comps are very flexible. You can run Kokomi with, like, say, Ayaka and Shenhe for freeze comp. You can run her with Ganyu for freeze comp. You can run her with Beidou and Fischl for taser. You can run her with Xiangling Bennett for vaporize, right? She is someone that makes everyone on the team shine around her. She just doesn't bring a lot of damage herself. I think she is way more flexible than Tartaglia. And I think on top of that, she requires very little investment to come online. You can give her a Prototype Amber or a Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer and just an Ocean Hue Clam set with hit points on it because she can't crit. She'll be great. So you want to think of her as a character that has a very high floor and a very low ceiling, which is kind of like some of these power creep characters here, only she's way, way more versatile, and she can be off-field and apply hydro, whereas someone like D-Luke has to be on-field to do anything. Moving on to Aloy. I haven't played Horizon Zero Dawn. I know people love it. I think she's cool. Like her voice lines. Problem is her skill is awkward, right? Those bombs don't go off reliably, so you can't DPS with her. They don't do a ton of damage or generate a ton of particles. And then, yes, her burst is a cryo nuke, so is Chongyun's. So you want to think of her as a Chongyun without constellations and without the infusion, right? So I think she's power crept the day she came out. Now, she has no constellations. I have no idea if she'll ever get constellations. She might. And if she does, those can make her really, really strong. But her state right now, she's just straight up power crept. Next comes, first of all, I don't know what this image is or why it's here. It looks like Beidou and Kazuha together. And they're great, but I'm just going to ignore it. Moving on to Toma. Toma also, like many of the 4-star units, scales well on constellations. I don't have any. I know it's C6. He's much more powerful than C0. That said, his main utility is his shield. And Zhongli's is just better in every way. I think that you can sub him for a Zhongli in a Hu Tao team because he will get Pyro Resonance and more Pyro application. That said, his Pyro application isn't strong enough to, like, support a Melt Ayaka, which would be cool, but it's just, frankly, too slow. If he had really good Pyro application and I could reliably melt it with Ayaka, then that would be incredible, but that's just not reality. So instead, he ends up being used almost exclusively for his shield, which is just not as good as other options. I mean, obviously, Zhongli, I keep talking about him, has an incredible shield. And Diona not only has a shield at least as good as Toma's, but she brings um, energy generation, she brings potentially elemental mastery, and she brings healing. So she brings more than he does. So I think he's just also straight up power crap. Moving on to Ito, a character I was looking forward to and enjoyed his story great. He's kind of a bozo, but I love him, of course. I wish he had actual thick arms. I'm disappointed by the noodle arm still. Ito's very good. He's very strong, does a lot of damage. The thing about him is he's pretty inflexible. He excels in a mono geo team. So you want to run him like with Zhongli, Albedo, Goro. Zhongli, that team exactly. To really enhance his defense, he becomes interruptible and he can just unga bunga the field. He does really good damage too. The thing is, he's very inflexible and he doesn't have access to reactions. And so, unless you're running a really specific team comp, he's not going to match up with the other main DPSers, right? So, like Ganyu, I can run in tons of comps. Hu Tao's damage is astronomical and stupid, right? Ayaka, I can put her in any sort of freeze comp and she'll dumpster fire everything. Whereas Ito, he needs a really specific situation to excel. In that situation, he's good, but I also think characters that have no reaction access or, for example, just can't melt or vape are just inherently weaker DPSers. So he's going to come here. That's not to say he's not good. You can do all the content with Ito. He's be great. Goro is a Geo character who buffs the team based upon his defense. He gives the team more defense. And it's based on how many characters you have in there. So basically, he also scales really nicely with constellations. I know his C4 is a heal. But Goro, essentially, he exists to buff Ito, right? Like, Goro is there for Ito. He also buffs Albedo a little bit. But Goro's purpose is to make Ito look good. Outside of that, I don't think he has much utility. I think he's great character, great acting. Miss Hino's hilarious. And I love the little puppy with his burst. Like, he's great in a lot of ways in terms of design, but he's super, super niche. Basically, Goro exists to buff Ito. In that situation, he's great. In other situations, not so much. Moving on to Shenhe. Shenhe is a cryo support specifically. She gives your team essentially on-hit cryo effects that if you deal cryo damage, she procs them and adds to it. So that can be really, really strong in the right situation. The thing is, you need a cryo unit that attacks quickly. And so Ganyu uses aim shots and is too slow. Eula uses the Claymore and is also pretty slow. So basically, Shenhe's niche is to make Ayaka look good. Shenhe is amazing support for Ayaka. That said, she scales really heavily on attack, so you don't need a specific artifact set in terms of how she's built up. You just need to stack attack through the sky, right? But because base attack multiplies attack, you really want her weapon. So you really want that Calamity Salvager, and weapons are a lot of primos, because we all know the weapon banner is a trap even when we roll on it. So she's down here in the niche support category. I'm going to move Chongyun back. I think these characters are all very, very strong in their situation, but basically not useful outside of it. So if you're an Ayaka main and you love Ayaka, you want Ayaka to do great, then Shenhe is a great option. But like if you're a Hu Tao main and you want Hu Tao to do great, then Shenhe is pointless, right? Yunjin has a similar effect. Again, Yunjin, great character, love the hangout, super cool. Her singing is incredible. Like, Chinese opera is astonishing. I love it. Yunjin here, she's awesome in all her stylistic ways, but I'd say that, as I was saying about Yunjin, love the character. She has a counter skill like Beto does. Her skill is specifically great at taking out a Golden Wolf Lord, I found out, which is awesome. I hate that fight. But what she does is she takes her defense and changes it to on-hit damage for whomever's attacking, but specifically normal attacks. So Ayaka, who uses a mixture of normal and charge attacks, is not appropriate. So Yunjun buffs anyone who has fast normal attacks. And right now, that's Yoimiya. I know a C0 Yunjun is as good as a high constellation benefit from Yoimiya. And so Yunjin with Yoimiya is, again, incredible, awesome pairing. But as cool as she is, she's basically useless outside of that. Many of these other characters who DPS don't use normal attacks that often. So she is, again, in the niche support. Very, very powerful. Moving on to Ye Miko. Ye Miko is an electro sub DPS nuker. Her burst does a ton of damage if you set up her skill right. And she provides a lot of off-field damage, even though she requires some field time to set up. Her scaling is really, really busted. But she has a high cost burst. And she's electro, so she requires a very large amount of investment to come online. I think she's designed to be a sub DPS in Raiden teams. I think also in terms of how it's going to feel to play, in terms of electro application, she's very similar to Fischl. She's kind of like a 5-star Fischl with a nuke. So I think she's very, very, very strong. And you would use her anytime you need an electro sub DPS, which is often going to be with Raiden. If you're using a melt or a vaporized comp, you're going to not want to have electro application because that's going to kill your reactions. So you can basically swap her anywhere you would use Fischl. She's also a mega waifu, and the character is awesome and amazing. But basically, she's just a lot of electro damage. That's said, she requires a high energy and high investment to get it out. Moving on to Zhongli. Zhongli, as I said earlier, gives you a very, very large shield, strongest shield in the game. His shield now also has an AoE resistance shred, where he lowers the resistances of all enemies to all damage, which is light-wise incredible. If you like it, his pillar will make other geo constructs resonate, and they do AoE damage, which is pretty incidental. His ult, on top of looking really cool, can do a lot of damage, but it also can petrify enemies for up to about 3 seconds, right? So Zhongli is an astonishing unit. I think he does everything except tons of damage himself. And so use him all the time. I use him always in Abyss. Use him for open world. Use him for domains. He's incredibly powerful. I know corruption goes through Zhongli shields, and that makes Zhongli Hu Tao teams a little dicey on the Wolf Lords, but outside of that, he's amazing. Moving on to Kamisato Ayato. I think Ayato, the thing is, I don't know his numbers yet, so I don't know how to rank him. I think that he's going to be good sub DPS and put on a lot of Hydro application. His ult looks like water Ganyus. His attacks are a water infusion and hidden AoE. They look essentially like water Kachings. His art is cool. His personality is cool. There's lots of things I like about this character. I just don't exactly know how strong he is. I think because Hydro application is so needed for melt not for melt, for vaporize and freeze teams, which are some of the most popular teams out there. I think he's going to be in really high demand, and it's going to be about how much energy does he take, how fast is that application, does he is there an internal cooldown issue where it only hits seldomly, even though it looks like it's hitting? Or maybe it hits and only applies hydro seldomly and you can't vape them all. But if he doesn't have an ICD issue, he's probably completely busted. If he does have one, I still think he'll be a good sub DPS. He doesn't really seem to bring any utility outside of his damage as far as I could tell. I could be wrong. So this is kind of by roles and roughly in their power levels. Toma has uses. Honestly, of these units, Toma might be the best state. I think that what you want to do for team building is you're going to want someone out of the main DPS or the driver for your comp. You're probably going to want someone 1 to 2 supports and 1 to 2 sub DPSs, right? You want to make sure you have enough durability and then pile on the damage, and someone's got to be on the field. You could, in theory, run a quick stop team where teams switch around, or something like, Xingqiu, Official, Beto, Rosaria, where their skills are, at least Rosaria probably is on the field most. Rosaria, Beto, because they have shorter skills, and that could work as well. But you're probably wondering who's S+ tier. First of all, in my opinion, no main DPS is S+ tier. That's not because they aren't incredible units. I have Ganyu and Hu Tao. I love them. I'm crowning them. I use them all the time. I think they're incredible. But the thing is, I could switch Ganyu for Ayaka, and it would be about the same. I could switch Ganyu for Eula, and yeah, I need a different comp. It would be about the same. Many times, I could switch Hu Tao for Yoimiya, and it would be the same. The point is, these main DPSers, yes, you need to build a team around them, but any one of those main DPSers will work. You'll clear Abyss. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. Like Yoimiya is bad at AoE, and Yanyu's worse at single target than she is at AoE, but they're all incredible units. I would say, going down the list, I think Raiden brings so much to the table that she has to be S+ tier. She brings her ult, her energy generation, the electro application, the damage. Like, she does things that no other unit can do. I can't swap Raiden in my team comps for something else and get the same utility out. Just not possible. I guess honorable mention here is, like, people really love Kokomi. Like, I don't think she's an S tier unit, but people who have her love her. Moving on. I think Xingqiu goes up here. Xingqiu can go in many, many teams. He's incredible, phenomenal unit. Can do a ton of damage, tons of hydro application. And he's very, very, very difficult to replace. It's possible in some teams Ayato could replace him. Right? Ayato could be up here too. I don't know yet. I don't think anyone does. It's possible he's that good. I don't know. Xiangling, again, incredible pyro application, incredible damage. Like Xingqiu, she's energy hungry, I guess. But she goes into a ton of teams, and you can run anything to make her shine, and she'll clean up the enemies for you easily. Moving on, I think all these other sub DPS are really good. I really like Albedo. I think he's awesome. But you can almost always replace him. He's never required. Like, you can swap him out for another DPS unit. It'll be about the same. And Ye Miko, as much damage as she can do. Like, again, if I put in Fischl instead of Ye Miko, my team's basically the same. Now here, I think supports that are flexible and unique are extremely valuable in Genshin. I think they're more valuable than DPSers. Our first one, and my pick for best unit in the game, is Zhongli. His shield is not replaceable by anything. Yeah, Noelle has a shield. Tank Fei has a shield. Toma has a shield. Xinyan has a shield, right? Diona has a shield, and Diona's shield is great. They're all worse than Zhongli's shield. On top of that, Zhongli has resistance shred that those other units don't have. On top of that, Zhongli's ult is a giant meteor that CCs everything. So, like, I think if Zhongli had no elemental burst, he would still be S tier. I think his shield is that strong. He's completely busted. I think he's a complete must pull. My second pick, I think the second best unit in the game is Kazuha. And that's because Kazuha does everything. He groups, he debuffs, he buffs. He's good in basically every team comp. And as strong as Venti and Sucrose are, they can't replace his resistance, his elemental bonus damage, right? So Kazuha is a unique unit and is extraordinarily powerful, extraordinarily popular. And now I consider it a must pull. I didn't before. Moving on, next S tier. I think Bennett is completely S tier. Not only does he require no investment, he's the best pyro battery in the game, generates a ton of particles. His attack buff is the strongest attack buff in the game, gives your team tons of attack. His heal is one of the strongest heals in the game, give your team tons of healing. The fact he has energy means he's always up, and all he needs is a good weapon and some hit point artifacts. So he costs nothing to invest. Basically, Bennett is like putting in, a quarter and getting $10 out. He's incredible. He's really, really strong, and he's not a 5-star, so I think he's a must pull. The last pick here, because I think he's irreplaceable. I know meta-wise, I'm putting him at the bottom of S tier, is Venti. I'm a little uneasy here because I don't think he's must pull the way Kazuha is. But the thing is, outside of the bosses, which you should have other ways of taking down, or Abyss 12, Venti just trivializes the game. Right? He can take any number of grouping and suck them up and blow them up. You're fighting 20 Hilichurls, use Venti. You're fighting Fatui, use Venti. You're fighting Kataragi, use Venti. Right? And that just lets your DPS go to town. He's incredible. I'd say for honorable mentions here, I think Diona brings a lot to the table. She's incredibly strong. That said, if you're running Diona and Mona in a freeze team, you can swap them for Shenhe and Kokomi, which is the more expensive version, I guess. I think Diona is like borderline S tier, but she's not as good as Venti, not as unique, and certainly doesn't bring the damage. And then if there wasn't Kazuha and Venti in S tier, Sucrose would be S tier. Sucrose is also an incredible unit. She has the resistance shred. She has grouping. She has energy battery. She's excellent. The thing is like, think of Sucrose as like Venti, Kazuha average. Venti has more CC. Kazuha has more damage amp. And Sucrose is maybe just a little less powerful. Mine's C5. I know at C6 she becomes a bit stronger too. But I think Sucrose is an incredible unit and should definitely be S tier. The reason these sub DPSs don't go up are because, like here, beta official, yay. Depending on who has more constellations, better weapon, better investment, they're essentially interchangeable. Rosaria, Kaya, essentially interchangeable. Anytime I need an extra DPS, Albedo works. But I could switch him with anyone else in this line. It would be fine. Kamisato Ayato has the potential to be S tier if he doesn't have internal cooldown issues and his damage is high enough. He could be S tier. He could be amazing. I don't know if he is, though. Down here, At really high investment, Ningguang, Noel, and Yanfei will do a lot of damage. They're awesome. Maybe not like Hu Tao, Gan Yu Ayaka, Eula levels, though. So they can't be S tier, and they require so much. And while Kaya is better than I think he is, I'm quite sure. Amber and Lisa, they require so much constellation and investment to be worth anything. And even then, Amber and Lisa will like provide resistances to Shred for Eula team. Amber will provide a pyro buff for a Hu Tao team. And Kaya has a lot more teams open to him, so that's why he's probably higher up than these two. And these niche supports, they can't be S tier because they're only used in like one situation. Chong Yun is the most flexible of them, but Sara is only useful in Raiden, Ye, Electra comps. Shenhe is only useful in Ayaka teams. Yunjun's only useful in Yoimiya teams, and Goro's only useful in Ito teams. Of course, that could change. And then sadly, these units down at the bottom, they're just crept out of the meta. That's not to say, again, they're bad. Like Travelers, I think it's worth investing in just to see what comes of it. But like a lot of these original 5 stars and 4 stars are the older units down here. There's just things that bring it to it. Like why would I use Barbara or Chi-Chi if I had Diona? Like Diona does everything they do but better, right? Why use Clear Diluc if I have Hu Tao? Like Hu Tao just does the same thing but way better. There's no point in Keqing when any of the other Electro units just do more damage. Razor is like Eula, but Eula's way better. Toma and Xinyan are like Zhongli, but Zhongli is way better. And, Alloy's like Chongyu's, but Chongyu's way better. So I think that's the simple end of the tier list. That's it for today. I suck at video editing, so hopefully as I splice these things together, it's going to be all right. We'll see. Also, play your Sayu. Sayu's awesome. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Catch you soon. Bye.